California, a state with some of the most secure prisons in America. Yet inside those walls, there are men who have been sitting on death row for more than 40 years, waking up every day not knowing when the end will come. Some have waited so long that their youth withered away behind bars, while their death sentence was never carried out. This has led society to ask, why are those who once committed shocking crimes still alive on death row? And what makes them the longest-waiting inmates in California's history? In this video, I will take you through their case files. From cold-blooded serial killers to cases that once outraged the entire nation. Together, we will see why justice in California has become a race that drags on for decades. Number 1. David Joseph Carpenter. In October of 1980, at Mount Tamalpais State Park, officers discovered the body of a woman lying near a trail. What used to be a peaceful spot for weekend exercise became the scene of a homicide. And that was only the beginning. Over the next 2 years, more victims were found in Marin and Santa Cruz. The community was terrified. The media called the unknown suspect the Trailside Killer. His real name was David Joseph Carpenter. Carpenter was born in 1930 and grew up in San Francisco. His childhood was marked by a stutter and early criminal records. By middle age, he had become a dangerous predator. Between 1979 and 1981, Carpenter hunted people on hiking paths. At least 10 victims were attacked, and 7 lost their lives. According to court records, he was not motivated by money or revenge. Prosecutors said his crimes were driven by sexual assault and domination. The jury found that rape, murder, and ambush were central elements in his case. In other words, Carpenter turned safe public trails into deadly traps. His crimes left families devastated and communities shaken. The victims were not just numbers. They were people who loved the outdoors, carrying backpacks for a light weekend. Some were students preparing for exams, others were simply out for a run. They left home with a smile and never returned. Justice may be delayed, but their family's loss is permanent. In May of 1981, Carpenter was arrested after a surviving victim identified him, and ballistic evidence linked him to several attacks. In 1984, a Los Angeles court sentenced him to death for 2 homicides and 1 attempted homicide. In 1988, in Marin County, he received another death sentence for 5 additional murders. Altogether, Carpenter was sentenced to death for 7 victims. In 1995, the California Supreme Court overturned 1 sentence due to jury issues, but in 1999 it was reinstated. The case showed how legal rulings can shift back and forth, but ultimately return to the original verdict. In 2010, DNA evidence linked Carpenter to the 1979 homicide of Mary Frances Bennett in San Francisco. This confirmed that his crimes had begun even earlier than many believed. Today, Carpenter is 95 years old. Since 2019, California has halted all executions. San Quentin closed its death row unit, and Carpenter was transferred to a prison medical facility in Stockton. He is frail now, but his death sentence remains on paper. From 1984 until now, he has waited more than 40 years. That is enough time for an entire generation of victims' families to grow old, and for society to debate the meaning of capital punishment. But for me, the focus is not on how long Carpenter has lived. It is on the families who lost loved ones, on the trails that turned from peaceful into haunting. Justice delayed can never erase their pain. Number 2. Michael Angelo Morales. In January of 1981, in Lodi, California, police found an abandoned car. Inside was the body of 17-year-old Terry Winchell. A young woman just beginning her life, with plans for the future, was taken away on an ordinary afternoon. The case shocked the community. The suspect quickly emerged, Michael Angelo Morales. According to court records, Morales lured Terry into his car and attacked her. Prosecutors said the motive was not money or hatred, but control and gratification. The jury found aggravating factors of sexual assault and ambush, making the crime especially severe. Terry's family lost their daughter at only 17. Her plans, her dreams, her entire life was cut short. In 1983, Morales was tried in Ventura County to avoid local pressure in Lodi. The jury convicted him, and in June of that year, the court sentenced him to death. In 1989, the California Supreme Court upheld the verdict. Morales entered death row, beginning a wait that has lasted decades. But his case is remembered not only for the crime, but also for changing state policy. In February of 2006, Morales was scheduled for execution. At the last minute, it was halted. The reason, doctors refused to participate, citing ethical concerns. A federal court later ruled that California's lethal injection procedure risked unnecessary suffering and was therefore unconstitutional. The Morales case became a turning point, leading to the long freeze on executions in California. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom signed an order halting all executions. The lethal injection chamber at San Quentin was closed, and death row inmates were dispersed under the CITP program. But Morales' death sentence still stands. As of 2025, he has waited 42 years, making him one of the longest-serving inmates on death row in California. For me, this story is not just about legal files. It is the painful memory of a family who lost their 17-year-old daughter. It shows how the justice system can stretch across decades, while grief remains forever. And it forces us to ask, what does justice truly mean when a death row inmate outlives generations of appeals, while the victim's name remains only on a gravestone? Number 3. Kevin Cooper. On the morning of June 5, 1983, a family friend went to the Ryan home in Chino Hills and discovered a horrifying scene. Doug and Peggy Ryan, their 10-year-old daughter Jessica, and 11-year-old Christopher Hughes were found deceased. Only 8-year-old Josh Ryan survived, though badly injured. The tragedy shook the entire state of California. Suspicion quickly turned toward an escaped inmate nearby, Kevin Cooper. Born in 1958, Cooper had broken out of the California Institution for Men just 2 days earlier. He hid in a vacant house next to the Ryan family. Evidence at the scene, including shoe prints, blood, and other items, linked Cooper to the attack. Despite his injuries, young Josh provided key details that helped investigators piece together a timeline. In 1985, Cooper went to trial and was sentenced to death. In 1991, the California Supreme Court upheld the verdict. Prosecutors described the motive as an attack during escape. The defense argued there could have been other suspects, even multiple assailants. That debate has continued for decades. In 2004, just before his scheduled execution, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a last-minute stay for further review. The case stretched on into the next decade. In 2021, Governor Gavin Newsom ordered an independent investigation. Early in 2023, a report concluded that the evidence against Cooper was extensive and conclusive. Supporters, however, insisted important details were overlooked. From then on, the case became more than a death sentence. It became a public controversy. Today, Kevin Cooper is 67 years old and remains under a death sentence. California has halted executions since 2019, but his verdict has never been overturned. He has now waited about 40 years. For the Ryan and Hughes families, the memory of loss remains as raw as ever. For the public, this case stands as both a symbol of violent crime and a reminder of how complex justice can be. To me, this is one of the most painful files. A family nearly wiped out in a single night, and a legal system forced to balance justice with doubt. Justice is not only about declaring a death sentence, it is also about the faith people place in the process. And in the Cooper case, that faith was deeply tested since the summer of 1983. Number 4. Stephen David Catlin. In March of 1984, 75-year-old Martha Catlin was admitted to a hospital in Bakersfield with symptoms that looked like pneumonia. Just days later, she passed away. Doctors at first believed it was natural due to her age, but her medical records raised suspicion. What was unusual was this. Years earlier, one of Stephen David Catlin's former wives had also died suddenly, and a few years after that, another wife passed away in the same way. 3 deaths at different times but following the same pattern. Forensic specialists re-examined Martha's tissue samples. They discovered traces of paraquat, a powerful herbicide. That became the turning point in the case. Catlin, Martha's adopted son, was the only one who stood to gain from her death. From there, a hidden chain of crimes began to unravel. Born in 1944, Stephen David Catlin had a string of marriages. Outwardly charming, but behind the scenes, manipulative. In 1976, his former wife Joyce died from breathing difficulties. In 1980, his wife Glenna passed away under the same conditions. and in 1984 it was Martha. On the surface, Catlin appeared grief-stricken. In reality, prosecutors said he had poisoned those closest to him. The motive was financial gain, including insurance benefits. Investigators later described the crimes as cold and calculated. The challenge was that paraquat poisoning mimicked pneumonia, making it hard for doctors to detect. But because tissue samples had been preserved, forensic experts uncovered the truth. The case turned on that single detail. A small piece of evidence brought a murderer into the light. In 1986, Catlin was tried in Monterey County for Glenna's death. The result? Life without parole. In 1990, in Kern County, he faced trial for Joyce and Martha. This time, the jury sentenced him to death for Martha and gave him life for Joyce. Catlin became one of the rare inmates carrying both a death sentence and multiple life terms. In 2001, the California Supreme Court upheld his verdicts. Federal appeals dragged on for years but failed. In December of 2024, the Ninth Circuit Court formally denied his last habeas petition. His death sentence remains intact. By now, Catlin has waited 35 years on death row. For the victims' families, hope of seeing the sentence carried out has faded with time. To me, this case is not just about homicide, and it is about betrayal within a family, the very place that should have been safest. Catlin did not strike in a moment of rage. He planned, step by step, over years. If not for preserved medical evidence, he might have escaped justice forever. His chain of poisonings reminds us, justice may come slowly, but in the end, the truth will be called by its name. Number 5. William Suff. In the late 1980s, Riverside County, California, lived under fear. Several women were found deceased in empty lots, orange groves, and along highways. Many of them were vulnerable, including those struggling with addiction and women working in prostitution. At that time, society often looked away from these groups. The killer knew this. He targeted those least protected, believing no one would speak up. The press called him the Riverside Prostitute Killer. His real name, William Lester Suff. Suff was born in 1950. His past already carried a stain. In 1974, he was convicted in Texas for the death of his infant daughter. He served time, and by 1984 he was released. Just a few years later, he began a string of killings in California. Between 1989 and 1991, multiple victims were lured into his vehicle. Suff attacked them and left their bodies in remote areas, turning Riverside into a place of constant dread. What shocked many was that during this entire time, Suff worked as a warehouse clerk for Riverside County. At one point, he even drove a county truck delivering furniture for the very task force hunting him. He was hiding in plain sight, blending into the system he defied. That irony made his case one of the most haunting in California history. In 1992, police arrested Suff after DNA evidence and witness testimony tied him to the murders. His trial in 1995 moved quickly. The jury deliberated for only 10 minutes before recommending death for 12 counts of first-degree murder and 1 attempted murder. Inside the courtroom, members of the Riverside community applauded. To them, it was long-awaited justice for victims who had been forgotten. Suff filed appeals for years. But in 2014, the California Supreme Court upheld his convictions and sentence. Since then, he has remained on death row. As of now, it has been more than 30 years. California halted executions in 2019, yet the death sentence still hangs over him. Each victim in this case was a real person. They had families, dreams, and hopes of starting over. Suff believed society would not care. But eventually, justice called his name. To me, what is most striking is not just that a county warehouse worker turned out to be a serial killer. It is the truth that no one deserves to be abandoned. Justice may arrive late, but darkness cannot hide forever. Number 6. Randy Stephen Kraft. On a night in May of 1983 on Interstate 5 near Mission Viejo, police stopped a Toyota Corolla swerving across lanes. Inside, on the passenger seat, they found the body of a 25-year-old Marine corporal. Behind the seat, officers discovered a small notebook filled with strange coded entries. Later, it became infamous as the scorecard of Randy Stephen Kraft. Kraft was born in 1945. Once a bright student, his life took a grim turn. Starting in the early 1970s, dozens of young men, many of them service members or hitchhikers, disappeared and were later found deceased near highways in Southern California. Prosecutors said Kraft's method was chilling. He approached men at bars or along the road, offered them beer or sedatives, and attacked when they could no longer resist. He treated each victim as an entry in his scorecard, replacing names with symbols, numbers, or cryptic notes. That scorecard became the key piece of evidence. It listed at least 61 entries, but prosecutors secured enough forensic evidence to charge only 16 homicides. His trial in Orange County in 1989 lasted months, becoming one of California's most expensive at the time. In the end, Kraft was convicted of 16 counts of first-degree murder, along with sexual assault and other aggravating factors. The jury returned a death verdict. In 2000, the California Supreme Court upheld his conviction and sentence. Since then, Kraft has filed many appeals, all unsuccessful. In 2019, California paused executions. That meant Kraft remained alive, but his death sentence still stood. In 2024, when San Quentin's death row was dissolved, Kraft was transferred to the California Institution for Men in Chino. By now, he has spent 35 years waiting under that sentence. What haunts investigators is that the scorecard listed 61 entries, suggesting far more victims than those charged. In 2024, police in Oregon confirmed the identity of one old case. Larry Eugene Parks, who disappeared in 1980, is believed to be part of Kraft's chain of crimes. This shows the scorecard still hides unanswered shadows. To me, Kraft represents pure detachment from humanity. He did not just take lives, he turned people into numbers. Behind each coded entry was a person with family, with dreams, with a life suddenly cut short. The scorecard killer is not just a chilling nickname. It is a reminder. When human beings are reduced to statistics, compassion is lost. Number 7. Richard Delmer Boyer. On December 7, 1982, in Fullerton, California, police entered a quiet home after neighbors reported they had not seen Francis and Eileen Harbitz. Inside, officers discovered a tragic scene. Both had been found deceased. That day marked the beginning of the case that placed Richard Delmer Boyer on death row. Boyer, born in 1958, knew the Harbitz family. He had done odd jobs in the area, but his life was unstable. By that time, he was deep in debt and using drugs. On the night of the murders, prosecutors said he entered the Harbitz home to steal money and valuables. When the couple confronted him, he attacked and fled. Investigators quickly focused on Boyer. Evidence included blood-stained clothing, a knife, and a discarded wallet, along with witness accounts. In 1984, Boyer was convicted and sentenced to death. But in 1989, the California Supreme Court overturned the verdict, citing constitutional violations in the way his confession had been obtained. It was a rare twist, a death row inmate temporarily spared due to legal errors. Yet fate caught up again. In 1992, a retrial was held. This time, prosecutors emphasized aggravating factors, multiple victims, and murder committed during robbery. The jury once again returned a death verdict. In 2006, the California Supreme Court upheld it. In 2015, the Ninth Circuit denied his federal appeal. And in 2016, the United States Supreme Court refused to review the case. Since then, Boyer has remained under a death sentence. With California's moratorium in 2019, he has not faced execution, but the sentence still hangs over him. More than 40 years have now passed since that night in Fullerton. Media attention often noted Boyer's claim that drugs and even the movie Halloween 2 influenced him. But excuses cannot undo the fact. 2 elderly victims, living quietly in their own home, were killed because of greed and desperation. To me, this case carries a double pain. The loss of Francis and Eileen Harbitz and the endless stretch of legal proceedings. Justice for them may have come late, but the truth remains. Richard Delmer Boyer was convicted of taking their lives, and today he still waits on death row, a reminder that the cost of violence can last longer than a lifetime. Number 8. Richard Allen Davis. In October of 1993 in Petaluma, California, 12-year-old Polly Klaas was having a sleepover with friends when a man broke into her room. Within minutes, Polly was gone. By the next morning, the entire town began what became the largest search effort in Sonoma County history. Police, the FBI, and thousands of volunteers joined in, hoping to bring Polly home. But weeks later, the truth emerged. Polly had been killed by Richard Allen Davis. Davis, born in 1954, had a long criminal history, including robbery, kidnapping, and assault. He had only recently been released from prison when he committed this crime. That night, Davis entered Polly's home, abducted her, and left. Weeks later, her body was found in a remote area. DNA evidence, witness statements, and scene analysis all pointed directly to Davis. In 1996, the trial was moved to San Jose to reduce community pressure. Prosecutors charged Davis with 4 special circumstances: kidnapping, burglary, robbery, and attempted sexual assault. The jury needed little time to convict and sentence him to death. Davis showed no remorse. In fact, during sentencing, he mocked the court, leaving Polly's family heartbroken and outraged. In 2009, the California Supreme Court upheld his conviction and sentence. Davis has since filed multiple appeals. In 2024, a Sonoma County judge rejected his bid to reduce the sentence, calling it simply a way to avoid death row. His death sentence remains intact. From 1996 until now, Davis has waited nearly 30 years. With California's moratorium since 2019, he remains alive in prison, while justice for Polly exists only on paper. The case of Polly Klaas left a deep mark on California. It helped drive the 3 strikes law of 1994, imposing tougher penalties on repeat offenders. And most of all, it left a lasting wound on a family who lost their daughter. To me, this story shows the cruelty of targeting a child. Polly should have had birthdays, a future, and a full life ahead. Davis took all of that away. His death sentence stands as a reminder that some crimes will never be forgotten. Number 9. Charles Ng. In 1985, what began as a small investigation in Calaveras County turned into one of the most disturbing cases in California history. Police followed a trail from a theft to a property in Wilseyville, where Leonard Lake and his partner Charles Ng were hiding. When arrested, Lake swallowed cyanide and ended his life. Ng fled to Canada. But inside that property, investigators made a horrifying discovery: a hidden bunker, thousands of bone fragments, and belongings of missing people. Charles Ng, born in 1960 in Hong Kong, came to the United States on a student visa but soon spiraled downward. After meeting Leonard Lake, the two carried out a calculated plan of kidnapping, captivity, and homicide. Victims included Harvey and Deborah Dubbs, their young son, and several others. The Wilseyville bunker contained cells and stolen property taken from those who never returned home. After Lake's death, Ng was arrested in Canada for robbery. The United States requested extradition, but the process dragged on for years, as Ng's lawyers argued against sending him back to face a possible death sentence. In 1991, Canada's Supreme Court allowed the extradition. Ng was returned to California. His trial began in 1998 and was moved to Orange County due to intense publicity. The prosecution presented thousands of pages of evidence, testimony, and forensic findings. In 1999, the jury convicted Ng of 11 counts of first-degree murder. On one charge, they could not reach a verdict. The final sentence was death. For decades, Ng filed countless appeals, raising hundreds of procedural claims. But in 2022, the California Supreme Court upheld his death sentence. Today, more than 26 years after the verdict, he remains on death row. This case remains haunting not just because of the number of victims, but because of the deliberate planning. Lake and Ng did not act in sudden rage. They built a system designed to capture and destroy lives. To me, this is the clearest example of humanity lost, where people were turned into pawns in someone else's twisted sense of power. Even though California has not carried out an execution since 2019, Ng's death sentence still stands. Justice may move slowly, but it follows relentlessly, no matter how long the attempt to escape. Number 10. Cary Stayner. In the winter of 1999, Yosemite National Park, known for beauty and family vacations, became the center of one of California's most shocking cases. In February, 3 women, Carol Sund, her daughter Julie, and her daughter's friend Silvina Peloso, vanished after a stay at the Cedar Lodge Motel. When their burned rental car was found in the forest, fear spread across the state. In the following weeks, their bodies were discovered one by one. The suspect was not a stranger. It was Cary Stayner, the motel's maintenance worker. Born in 1961, he came from a family already marked by tragedy. His younger brother, Stephen Stayner, had been kidnapped as a child and held captive for 7 years before escaping. But instead of breaking the cycle, Cary Stayner became the perpetrator of his own violent crimes in a place known as the heart of America's wilderness. In July of 1999, another victim, park naturalist Joy Ruth Armstrong, age 26, was found deceased near her cabin. Investigators quickly linked the crime to Stayner. When arrested, he confessed not only to Armstrong's murder but also to the Sund and Peloso case. This split the legal process into 2 parts. In federal court, because Armstrong's death occurred on federal land, Stayner pleaded guilty in exchange for life without parole, avoiding a federal death sentence. In California State Court, however, prosecutors pursued capital punishment for the 3 other victims. His trial in San Jose in 2002 lasted months. Forensic evidence, his confession, and aggravating factors were laid before the jury. On August 27th, Stayner was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. In December, the jury recommended death. The court affirmed the sentence, citing the brutality and calculation behind his crimes. Since then, Stayner has spent more than 2 decades on death row. He has filed appeals citing mental illness, but the California Supreme Court upheld his sentence. When California imposed its moratorium in 2019, all executions stopped. Stayner, like others, remains alive in prison. In 2024, the state dissolved San Quentin's death row program, transferring inmates under the CITP plan. His death sentence, however, remains in force. To me, the Stayner case is not only about cold-blooded crimes. It is about betrayal of trust. Visitors came to Yosemite seeking peace, yet became victims of someone working within the lodge. Carol Sund, Julie Sund, Silvina Peloso, and Joy Ruth Armstrong deserve to be remembered as more than case files. They are reminders that justice does not forget. Even if executions are halted, Cary Stayner's death sentence remains a marker of society's need to condemn crimes of this magnitude. Number 11. Douglas Chief Stankewitz. In Fresno, 1978, the death of young Teresa Graybiel marked the beginning of one of the longest legal journeys in California history. 19-year-old Douglas Ray Chief Stankewitz was accused of kidnapping, robbery, and homicide. His first trial quickly placed him on death row, making him one of the earliest inmates sentenced to death after California reinstated capital punishment. For decades that followed, the Stankewitz case became an example of the complexity of the American legal system. Defense attorneys filed appeal after appeal, focusing on whether the sentencing phase had been unfair. In 2009, a federal court overturned the death sentence, ruling that his original lawyers had failed in their duties. The murder conviction itself remained intact. Prosecutors in Fresno then faced a choice: retry the penalty phase or reduce the sentence to life without parole. By April of 2019, more than 40 years after the crime, Fresno prosecutors announced they would no longer pursue the death penalty. The court resentenced Stankewitz to life without the possibility of parole. It was a turning point. Once one of the nation's longest-serving death row inmates, he became a prisoner under LWOP, but the case did not end there. In 2022, the 5th District Court of Appeal ruled that Stankewitz should have been granted an additional hearing before being resentenced. The case was sent back to Fresno. In January of 2024, a new hearing took place before Judge Arlen Harrell. On December 27th, the court rejected all attempts to alter the outcome, keeping his life without parole sentence intact. Today, Stankewitz has spent about 47 years in prison. He was once among the longest-waiting death row inmates in America, and now he stands as a symbol of California's shift, from a state that frequently carried out executions to one that has halted them entirely since 2019. In this shift, many old death sentences have been converted to life without parole rather than carried out. To me, the Stankewitz case is a reminder of both the victim and the system. Teresa Graybiel was not just a name in a file. She was a young woman whose future was stolen in a brutal act. Her family endured decades of legal battles before the case finally closed. In this instance, justice did not mean an execution. It meant ensuring the offender would never again cause harm. Life without parole became the final sentence after nearly half a century.